Donald Trump said very clearly that he intended to appoint Supreme Court justice who would be willing to overturn the court's landmark decision of Roe v. Wade. Well, most remarkably, Trump went so far as to say there should be some form of punishment. He never said what kind of punishment for a woman who chooses to have abortion. Here's my interview, just to remind you, with then-candidate Trump back in March of 2016. Do you believe in punishment for abortion, yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
He said it. And now with the retirement of Justice Anthony Kennedy, President Trump is set to appoint his second justice to the High Court. And that could have, of course, massive implications. For years, opponents of abortion have been leading a campaign against the right to choose in courtrooms across the country. It could be just a matter of time before one of those cases reaches the Supreme Court. Joining me right now is Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington State and Alexis Miguel Johnson, a Planned Parenthood board member and the executive director of the Perception Institute. I want to talk to the senator first. Just generally, you've been confronted with this staggering news that the vacancy sits there, number 5 on a 9-person court, right in the middle.
Unbelievable. I think the most important thing about this whole thing is that the president's views are out of the mainstream of the American public. So the question is the president going to insert his views, or is he going to consult with Congress on what are the mainstream views of America on this particular issue?
What did you make of his talk about?
Horrible.
It's a little weird to talk about even. What did he mean by some form of punishment? I mean, that's a little imaginative.
The fact that he took this pledge during the campaign and said that he is going to appoint nominees that believe this. So he's not for holding up the privacy rights that now have been well established and supported by many courts. He's basically saying, I'm going to roll that back. And so now he has an opportunity to really put his thumb on the scale to make that difference. We have to do everything possible to make sure that that doesn't happen. So his views are not in the mainstream, and that's the case that we need to take to every member of the United States Senate. You're willing to change what has now been accepted as policy in our state. It's been codified into state law. Maybe we'll have a campaign in every state in America to show people that we are going to fight for these privacy rights.
Well, Ronald Reagan picked Justice Kennedy. And Justice Kennedy basically believed in the Casey case, he said there cannot be, and the essential right of a woman to choose an abortion, the right to choose, to make the decision, must be protected, and there'll be no undue burden put on her head. It's like you got to do this 1 minute after midnight. No tricks, no undue. He said none of that.
Right. And so the point is that you have now this libertarian judge now being replaced by a president who is showing authoritarian tendencies.
Mike Pence tendencies.
Authoritarian. So he's like, it's my way, and this is the way. Can you
stop this? Can you slow it down to, here's my hope, you can slow it down until after the voters vote, so you can throw this to the people this fall, so they got to say in this thing.
We're going to throw it to them right now. These privacy rights that are so important across the board are things that are now been well established and are in the penumbra. What we're going to point out is that this president, if he's getting his list from the Federalist Society or the Heritage Foundation, is supporting textualists. That's it. And a textualist means they're not going to agree that these privacy rights, whether it's your right to privacy at home, whether it's your right to privacy on the internet, whether it's your right to privacy as a woman, that they are going to support the penumbra that is existing within the Constitution. That's the fight we're going to take to the people, and that's where we're going to ask our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to make sure that they're supporting those privacy rights as well.
Thank you, Senator, very much. Thank you very much for coming. I want to go to Alexis on this because I think that every great Supreme Court decision, whether it was Roe v. Wade, about the sort of basic privacy rights of a woman to make a decision about her body, and the idea that separate but equal is wrong inherently. These are all profound decisions to do, where you can't find in the letter necessarily of the Constitution. You have to find the spirit inherent in it and what the Constitution is all about in terms of the Bill of Rights. And so you're not going to get a textualist, as the senator just said, to help you on these landmark decisions. They're always going to be saying no. They're always going to say, leave it the way it was. Your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely.
Except for Roe v. Wade. That's what they want to change.
Right, exactly. I mean, and look, I was born in 1972, 5 months before Roe v. Wade. And so the idea that that a right that has always existed in my lifetime and the majority of women have grown up under is something that this administration wants to undermine and overturn is completely insane. And the preview, we've seen the trailer. 18 states actually have existing laws, unlike Senator Cantwell's state, there are 18 states that have existing laws that are intended to overturn, to eliminate abortion if Roe v. Wade is overturned. So there's reason to be incredibly concerned about trying to find a textualist as opposed to really having this conversation with the people, with the 70% of Americans who support Roe v. Wade.
Is your group going to try to stop this vote from occurring before this election?
Well, we're doing exactly what Senator Cantwell suggested. We are out talking to every senator, having these conversations, because it is imperative that the Senate rejects any candidate that that opposes Roe. So, you know, part of the resistance has certainly been engaging in the streets, in the marches, in the movement. The other part is having these conversations with our senators. People like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who have been incredibly thoughtful on helping support women's health care. These are the kinds of voices, the conversations that we need to be having, activating, engaging in people across the country.
Well, Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine said Roe v. Wade is settled law when asked about abortion rights this afternoon. Let's watch.
Well, first of all, I view Roe v. Wade as being settled law. It's clearly precedent, and I always look for judges who respect precedent.
Well, Susan Collins is great, and she said she respects judges and accept it as it is. But what do you think, Senator Cantwell? Do you believe that Roe v. Wade is safe?
No, because when a president makes that pledge on national TV and says he's going to stick to it and then goes to the absurd measure of saying he would punish women, then I think you have to take him. What we know he said during the campaign, he is implementing. And what we don't want is a bench that basically is going to follow that textualist list that's being sent to him. It'd be one thing if he was calling us up and saying, okay, I hear you. Let's hear who you think are justices that would follow privacy rights.
Well, this 5-4 court has done stuff none of us could imagine. It intervened in a presidential election in 2000, took it out of the hands of the states, and decided that George W. Bush, the 5 Republicans on the court, said should be president. And they voted 5-0 to make George W. Bush the president of the United States. On Citizens United, they said money should talk more than the voter.
Right.
They made that partisan decision. They keep making partisan decisions, and then they say we're above partisanship. What nonsense.
It's not about partisanship. It is, but it's about corporations. The other side right now is hurrying in the tax bill to give corporations what they want. They have people who are in the cabinet who are not following regulations, and now they want a court that is also going to side with them and basically say whether it's clean air that basically was so hard.
You mean the working people of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Indiana, and Michigan, and places like the working stiff out there, man and woman, they thought they were getting a populist president. What they got is a corporate shill.
Well, right now, if they're going to overturn this as the textualists want, then no, the little guy is not going to be represented on the bench.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.